Good morning. We are going to continue our conversation of the kingdom Protista. There were the protozoans that we've already covered in the last lecture. Now we're moving into the Algal Protists, and so we're looking at the protists that are kind of like plants. We saw the protists yesterday that were kind of like animals because they moved around and ate things. These are the protists that are kind of like plants because they are stuck to something and they photosynthesize. And this picture, this is a picture of a kelp forest. This can be found in cold waters. Catalina Island has probably got some of the best kelp forests off the coast of California and north. Monterey Bay area is famous for that too. So you don't see anything like this diving off of our coast because it's too warm for algae here. But if you go to cold water, the algae are happier. So here we've got some California sea lions coming to say hi to you. So it's very, very fun. Hello, friends. Okay. So, generally speaking, algal protists produce more biomass and oxygen worldwide than plants. So that's something that most people don't know. When you think about what makes the oxygen that we breathe, yes, plants, yes, forests, yes, grasslands, yes, bushes, but more of the oxygen that you breathe is produced by algae than by terrestrial plants. And that's especially true for us who live on an island surrounded by the ocean. We are surrounded by water that has some algae in it, not giant kelps, but some algae still. And it produces more of our oxygen than the plants on our island. So produces more biomass, there's more of them, more algae, and more oxygen produced than plants. Base of the marine and aquatic food webs. Just like on land, grasses provide the base of the food web, and a cow eats the grass, and a cougar eats the cow, and etc. The grasses and the plants are the base of the food web on land. In the ocean and in fresh waters, the algae provides the basis of the food web. There are very few true plants that live in the water. Aquatic plants are rare. Marine plants are even rarer. There's only one vascular plant that grows in the ocean. Everything else that you see in the ocean that you think might be a plant is in fact algae. And so they are the basis of the food web in the water sorts of environments. They reproduce both sexually and asexually in the same organism. So an algal organism can divide binarily, can go through binary division and can produce another algal organism by just division. And then they also can produce gametes that fuse in the water and settle to the bottom and grow into another organism. So they reproduce both ways, sexually and asexually. And on the same colony, on the same structure of algae, you will find portions of it that are reproducing sexually and portions of it that are reproducing asexually. So again, these are colonies. It does say organism here, but when you look at a piece of kelp or you look at a strand of green algae, that's a colony that you're looking at, not one organism. And so we have some terminology for things that are reproduced sexually and some terminology for things that are reproduced asexually. If we have a new algal organism that is formed by the fusion of gametes by algae sperm and algae egg, when those fused in the water column and settled to the bottom and start becoming algae, we call that thing that it made a zygote, just like when a human egg and human sperm get together and make a new individual, we call that a zygote. Okay, so same word there. But algae can also just kick out cells that it produced through mitosis, and those cells will settle down and create new algae colonies that are a clone of the parent because they are just identical, spawned out their offspring. And those are called zoospores. Okay. We haven't. So here are some pictures of algae and algal blooms taken from space. This is the Great Lakes. This is Lake Erie, Detroit and Windsor, Ontario, Canada. And you can see all of the algae being produced here along the shores of the lake. And that algae is blooming as densely as it is because of all of the chemical runoff and all the like water pollution going into the water. It provides fertilizer for the algae, and the algae are just exploding. So in the Great Lakes, the presence of huge amounts of algae, while good for the oxygen level, is bad for fish and things like that because there's just way too much algae in the water. You also get algae blooms like that in the middle of the ocean. This is in the where is this? I forgot where this is, but you can see algae blooms again, just kind of in the middle of oceans and lakes, piles of algae blooming and coming together. And while it's again good for the oxygen levels of the planet, it is not the best for marine life when there's that much. Biomass pyramid. In the water, again, aquatic plants, algae produce all of the food, the original food, and then it's the basis for a food pyramid, just like on land. You've seen these kinds of things before in elementary school, but in the water, it's the algae and the aquatic plants that do that. Here's an algae farm, and the algae farm is doing its thing. And why do you think people would farm algae? What would we be using algae for in such an industrial situation? Why would they farm algae? To produce oxygen? That's a good byproduct. The air in this area is more oxygenated because of the algae, but that's not what they're doing. All of this money wasn't spent to add oxygen to the atmosphere. Why do you think they're farming algae?
There's a use for electricity.
Yeah. So they grow algae, and it grows very fast. It grows faster than any other kind of plant. And so you can fill up one of these things with algae really quickly as it grows and mass produces itself in these tanks. And then they dry it and they burn it as a fuel for a power plant. And so they're growing it to use it as a combustion fuel. And the cool thing about that is that when you burn this to use it as a fuel, you're releasing CO2 into the air. But then as you're growing the algae, it recaptures all of that carbon dioxide. So it's a carbon neutral way of producing energy is to burn and use the algae as a combustion source. And it grows real fast, and it absorbs a lot of CO2 while it's growing. So it balances out in the atmosphere the algae that you've dried and burned for the algae that you've grown. And it grows a lot faster than trying to do that with like grasses or trees or wooders. So it's kind of cool. This is a power plant that's growing algae as a fuel. And then, of course, algae is eaten. Here on the islands, we eat algae in lots of forms. This is an algae salad. And seaweed is algae, so those fukaki, how do you say that?
Fukaki.
Yeah. That's algae, obviously. And then here it is not dried out, just served as lettuce and salad. And so it's definitely something that people eat, and even people who are not, eating Polynesian sorts of influenced foods eat algae too. They just don't know it. Algae is a very common thickener used in ice cream, and so yeah, people don't know that they're eating algae, but it's a common thickener in lots of creamy sorts of foods. Yeah. So let's look at some of the phyla in the kingdom Protista that fall into this category of algal protists. The first phylum we're going to look at is Euglenophyta. These are unicellular. They're propelled by two flagella. So we said last time that flagella are like little outboard motors in boats. And Euglenophyta has two of these little outboard motors. One of them is very long, and one of them is very short. So they're not equally powerful, and I don't know why they have a long one and a short one, but they do. And they have a red light sensitive eye spot. So that's really cool. This is a single-celled organism, but it can swim to where there is a lot of red light. And things that photosynthesize are green, but the reason that they look green to us is because they're absorbing red light to do their work, to do photosynthesis. It's red light that does the work of photosynthesis. So they have a little eye spot. Now, not an eye, because that would require lots of cells. This is a single cellular organism, but it does have a part of its cell that is sensitive to red light, and it will swim until it finds red light, and then it'll sit there and do photosynthesis, which is really, really cool. So it's like a food finding thing. It's like when I get around a buffet, I know where it is. Same idea here. This thing swims until it finds red light, and then sits there and does photosynthesis. If it can't find red light to do photosynthesis, it can absorb nutrients from the environment, kind of like some of these other protozoans that we saw, where they can eat food molecules floating around the environment. They would rather produce their own food and through photosynthesis. So Euglenophyta, the Euglena organisms, are really very cool. They look like this. They have two flagella, one that barely sticks out of the top and one that is longer. So in this diagram, you would only see the base of the second one, but it barely sticks out of the top, and then they have a long one. And then obviously the nucleus, these are eukaryotic cells, and they have chloroplasts for performing photosynthesis. They have contractile vacuoles to help them remove wastes. And then that red eye spot, it's called a stigma, and that helps them find red light to do photosynthesis. So very cool looking creatures. Here's a picture of one in a microscope. Huh? It does kind of look like a pea. But very complicated, lots of cellular biology going on in there. There's another microscope image of one swimming around looking for red light to do photosynthesis. Okay. Chlorophyta, green algae, these are the ones that look like plants. And if you're down at the beach and you see what you think is grass growing on the rocks in the intertidal region, it's not grass. It's chlorophyta, it's green algae. And some of them are unicellular, some of them are very large colonies. And so it can be quite long strands of what looks like grass, but it's algae. Yeah, it goes like this, yes. Low like a tree in the wind. Yeah. These guys make starches from sugars for storage like plants. So if they make more sugar than they need, they can store it for a bad time, and they store it in the form of starches. So when animals have more food than they need, what do they make? You eat too much, what do you do?
Spit it out.
Do you?
No,
You say get fat, right? You store it as fat. Animals store excess food as fat. Plants store excess food as starches. And these algae organisms do that like plants, but they're not. There are over 7,000 species of green algae. So I'm going to show you some pictures, but this is a huge group of organisms. Lots and lots and lots of kinds of green algae. Some of them look like balls, some of them look like plants, some of them look like just masses of green slime. But they all are algae. They're all unicellular or colonies. So they're all doing photosynthesis. The other phylum that's on this stage is on this slide is Dinoflagella, and these are also double flagellated algae. They are unicellular. They're marine. The Euglena is more often than not in the aquatic world, in the freshwater world. The Dinoflagella, two flagellum, they bioluminesce when they're disturbed. So this is cool. Have you guys ever seen red tide? Have you guys ever seen that? Have you ever seen water that glows in the waves? Yes, Noah has. You've got to have kind of colder water as well. Out here, it's not something that you see a whole lot. But these are algae, and when they are disturbed, when you like swoosh the water around them, they glow, they bioluminesce, they glow green. And so I'll show you some cool pictures of what is called red tide, because when they're not glowing green, they look red. So the water will look kind of reddish when it has a lot of these algae in it. And then if you swoosh the water around them, then it glows green. It's pretty cool. So here's just some pictures of some chlorophyta individuals. Some of them are single-celled like this. This is actually two chlorophyta individuals sharing this overall sort of, I don't know, needle-like body shape. These, though, look like grass grasses and plants, but they're not. They're all colonies of algae, and every cell in there is its own individual. They're just living next door to each other. So green algae come in all different sizes and shapes and colors. These are also green algae. This is called volvox. And these are cells of individual algal organisms, and then they secrete this like mucousy ball to keep them next to each other. But this ball is not alive. It's just it's kind of a dried snot. And these little algal cells live in it and hang out next to each other and live their lives. This is a dinoflagellate. And so they have two flagella. One of them forms a belt around them, and one of them sticks out the bottom. So the one that forms a belt makes them spin, and the one that sticks out the bottom makes them go forward. It does come in like 4 genes. They have a fairly hard case around them that is made out of, among other things, some like silicon that they take up from the water. So they've got sort of a glassy wall around them, and these are the ones that glow green. So it's called red tide when there's a lot of them in the water because they have this sort of reddish look to them. But when you disturb them, they glow, which is really cool. That I don't know. It's just the way that their cytoplasm looks. But yeah, when you disturb them, they glow. So. So this is, you've got to have cold water to get this done. So this will be more common like Oregon, Washington. California has this sometimes, but you've got to have cold water. Well, you could, but you'd be cold. I mean, it doesn't make you sick. And here we have people surfing in it.
Oh my God.
And people making like snow angels in it.
Oh.
Yeah. It's cold.
So there you go. Algal Protists continue here. We've got a couple more phyla. Chrysophila. These are the golden algae. These are mostly freshwater, and they store food molecules as oils. So the green ones, when they have a lot of food and they've built up a lot of food reserves, they store their food as starches. These guys store it as oils. Consequently, they're very, very oily and sticky. If you were to grab a handful of golden algae and squeeze it, you could get oil to run out of it, and it would be, kind of slimy to the touch. But they're freshwater algae, and they are doing photosynthesis just like everybody else, but they're not green. They're kind of a golden color when you see them, mostly in freshwater lakes and rivers and streams. The Phaeophyta, the brown algae, these are the kelps. These are my favorites. This is the background of all of these slides has been, is the brown algae. They form massive, massive colonies. And so the stalks of kelp here can be 200 or more feet in length. And those stalks of kelp it's not an individual, remember, this is not a plant. This is a colony of individual cells glued next to each other and doing the job of living all on their own. They help each other by being glued next door and providing some anchorage to each other, but they don't pass chemicals back and forth between each other. They don't do functions of life for one another. And so it is a massive colony. This is some of the fastest growing organisms in the world. The giant brown kelp off of the coast of California and Oregon grows up to 2.5 feet a day. So try to picture a plant growing 2.5 feet a day. It's just ridiculous. But the algae will grow 2.5 feet a day. And so the cells are all uniform, but there is a macrostructure. Macrostructure means when you look at this, you do see what looks like leaves, okay? And you do see, and I'll show you better pictures in a minute, you do see little air bladders that help it float because this is floating up from the surface, from the bottom of the ocean up to the top where it can do photosynthesis well. And those little air bladders help provide flotation. What looks like leaves they call blades, or what looks like stems they call stipes, and what looks like a root they call a holdfast. And so it looks like a plant. It looks like it has roots and stems and leaves, But every cell in that organism is exactly the same, and no cell passes chemicals to its neighbor. So it's still a colony, even though the colony has this structure to it. So I love swimming through this stuff. This is kind of like the coral reefs of cold water. In warm water, it's the coral that provides the anchorage for all of the life. And in cold water, did I say cold? In warm water, it's the corals. In cold water, it's the algae. And so you have things growing on the algae, you have fish living amongst the algae, you have sea lions hunting the fish that live amongst the algae. This is the Chrysophyta, golden algae first. So these are individual cells, and they live in a colony, and they don't necessarily cooperate with each other. Another golden algae that looks kind of like olive leaf clusters. And then my best friend, the brown kelp. So this looks like a leaf, but it's not. It's called a blade. And these things look like stems. No. I don't know if I call them soft, but they're not. Yeah, they're kind of rigid. But the stem here is called a stipe. And this air bladder is full of air and helps provide lift. And so the plants don't reach, the colonies don't reach up to the sunlight because they're being held up by the stems. They reach up to the sunlight because they're being floated by all of these little air bladders. And so it floats up to the surface.
They get lost.
Oh.
Yeah, I imagine the shark would pop
Yeah.
out of nowhere.
It can happen. It can happen. So this is a big picture of brown kelp. I think it's got its own kind of unique beauty. And again, the thing that looks like roots are just cells that are glued to the rock, and we call it the holdfast. And the stem is called a stipe, and the leaves are called blades.
Is it located in like our ocean?
It's got to be near enough the shore that it's in 200 or so feet of water. This is the last slide. Basilia rheophyta and rhodophyta. So these are the diatoms. These are the amazing stained glass creations of God. They are unicellular, but their cell walls are made of glass. That's so cool. They absorb silicon from the water. There's obviously a lot of sand in the ocean, so there is dissolved silicon from the water. And they absorb that dissolved silicon and they use it to make glass cell walls for themselves. And then when there's thousands and thousands of designs and shapes of these things. So it's a very rigid cell wall made out of glass. And the cell lives inside there, and it's protected by the glass house that it's living in. And then when the cell dies, everything soft and gushy inside the cell, goes away, decomposes, but the glass house remains. And so they use these little itsy bitsy glass cells for filtration systems all the time. If you have a pool, you may use diatomaceous earth as the filter medium in the pool. I don't know if anybody has a pool and everybody has to charge the filter with diatomaceous earth. But that's the most common pool filter medium is all of these algae cells that the cell has died, but the glass house remains. And these little tiny pieces of glass are great filters as well. But they're just gorgeous. When you see them, you're gonna know why I say that they're gorgeous. And artists have used them on a microscopic scale to make stained glass pictures. And they have to move these around very carefully, and they're doing it under a microscope. But you can arrange diatoms to make gorgeous pieces of art. And this is just another one of the amazing things that God built. And I don't know what kind of enjoyment God gets out of our discovery of things, but I got to think that He is happy when we are happy with Him. And you've got to imagine the first scientist to look at diatom under a microscope and see these gorgeous glass structures would have been just astounded at the creativity of God. And he must have been like, yeah, I've been waiting a long time to be able to see those. Aren't they cool? And then rhodophyta, these are the red algae. They grow in shallow, warm marine water. We have a lot of red algae here. If you go out into the rocks, you'll frequently see little red things growing on the rock. And that's rhodophyta. they absorb calcium from the sea water and secrete it as a shell. And so these red algae are actually quite hard, and it's because they've absorbed calcium and they've used it to kind of build up sort of a skin around them. But here's some diatoms. Aren't those amazing? Those are all made out of glass. Some of them look like starfish, some of them look like peas. And when these were alive, they would have been green because they were photosynthesizing. But now that they're dead and we're just looking at the glass house, they're clear. Here's more. These are living diatoms. Some of them are rods, some of them are circles. And they're, yep.
Can you feel that?
No, they're microscopic. And here's a piece of art that somebody made with diatoms. Isn't that cool? It's microscopic. You'd have to look at that under a microscope to be able to see it.
Oh.
But
Yeah,
they,
totally.
yeah, but they arranged the diatoms and glued them to each other. This is Rhodophyta. This is red algae, red encrusting algae. We have a lot of this around our area. And this is too much red algae.
Could you imagine like what is the plastic
Huh?
one?
Yeah. So too much red algae, it starts to look like the Moses plagues. But there you go. Those are the algal